Hi, I've seen doctors on this app perpetuating conspiracy. I've seen doctors on this app talk about how a bullet entered Trump's ear from behind and created the perfect puncture that would allow for him to appear a day or two later with no visible bruising, no graze wound, and most unbelievable of all, no additional bleeding the day of the injury. I have watched medical professionals who have a legitimate, like they have a legitimate enterprise here on TikTok. There's no reason to believe that they're lying about working in a hospital. I've watched medical professionals twist and bend in order to explain how on earth Trump could have been injured in the way that he said he was injured and yet present in the way that he is presented. Interestingly, there's another side of TikTok that, in my experience, isn't gaining a lot of mainstream traction. And that's the side of TikTok that has Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, people from the last 24 years, including myself, who have experience with 5.56 rounds impacting the cartilage of the ear. The ear is an incredibly vascular thing. When it gets nicked or cut or punctured or receives a lot of trauma, it bleeds a lot. Something I would love for you to consider is on the day of this alleged injury, I've seen who have experience with 5.56 rounds. The ear is an incredibly vascular thing. When it gets nicked or cut or punctured or receives a lot of trauma, it bleeds a lot. Something I would love for you to consider is on the day of this alleged injury, do you notice that there is no more bleeding? Once Trump stands up, there is no additional blood. All of the blood is static. And there's no additional bleeding. We know they didn't use quick clot. We know they didn't use compression because the ear was visible for an enormous amount of time. Is the amount of blood on that towel that the agent was holding consistent with the amount of blood that we would expect from this type of injury to an ear? Some doctors who have perpetuated conspiracies about where the bullet came from are saying that yes, this is believable. But veterans who have experienced this kind of wound, both as somebody who's been shot or as somebody who's treated somebody who's been shot by a 5.56 round, disagree. People with direct experience with this type of weapon and this type of injury are calling bullshit. I'm one of them. I've had the unfortunate privilege of being in situations where negligent discharges result in cartilage damage from a 5.56 round from anywhere between 50 to about 500 feet away. The amount of blood should have changed, given that no compression occurred. Any healthcare professional who says otherwise is being disingenuous. I think it's really important that we all consider that there is a non-0% chance that Donald Trump is lying about having been the victim of an attempted assassination. I think that we all need to ask ourselves, regardless of political affiliation, are we 100% confident, given all of the inconsistencies, given all of the anomalies, are we 100% confident that Trump was actually the target of an attempted assassination? I get shared Occam's razor a lot. Occam's razor basically suggests that the most believable scenario is probably the one that's true, the one that takes the least amount of bending, the one that takes the least amount of explaining. The most obvious case is often the actual case. It's ironic to me that Occam's razor is used to dismiss the inconsistencies around what we all watched, around what there is photographic evidence of, around what many veterans have experience around. So somebody is lying. That's for damn sure. Are the veterans from the last 24 years lying about their experience? Or are the doctors on this platform who have perpetuated other conspiracy theories about this lying about what happened? Is that consistent with what we know about Donald Trump and whether or not he would lie about something like this? I welcome anyone and I encourage anyone to help me understand why the only medical professional we have heard from is a congressman from Texas. Isn't that a little bit weird to you? No nurse, no corpsman, no practicing doctor, just a congressman from Texas. Have you looked into how Ronnie Jackson got elected? Have you looked into his history and whether or not he's somebody that you can trust? I hope I've given you some information to think about today. And if you think about just one thing, I want you to think about the amount of blood. I want you to think about the amount of blood, because the ear would have continued to bleed. But what we saw was not consistent with what people familiar with that type of wound, and when I say familiar, I mean intimately familiar with that type of wound. What we saw was not consistent. And many of us raised our right hand and swore the same oath. And many of us are saying the same thing. The challenge is to ask yourself, with all of these veterans talking about wound care, amount of blood, triage experience, cavitation, trauma, etc., with all of these veterans calling bullshit, is there any chance that your understanding of this event could be inconsistent with reality? Any chance? For the answer to be yes, you just have to accept that the people involved would knowingly lie to you. So ask yourself, is there any evidence that the people we're talking about would lie to you about this? Hope you have a good day.